Daviiz had to go and ruin it.
Welcome back, guys. So obviously this week's episode of Gotham is one of the best episodes this season. I mean, my favorite is still the one with Solomon Grundy rising, Solomon Grundy coming to life, but nonetheless, it is one of the best episodes this season. It starts with that scene with Martine. I never expected to see him again. Uncle Penguin sent me to get you. The words of the Riddler, the words of Edward Nygma. And Edward Nygma was amazing on this episode. Edward Nygma was pretty great on this episode. Now, there were a lot of things going down on this episode. There were a lot of comic book Easter eggs as well, so allow me to break them down bit by bit and piece by piece over here, and in a real quick fashion. So let's go. So on last week's episode, Sofia smashes Lee's hands and leaves the Narrows under new management, that being Samson's management. And right off the bat, we get to hear that statement: the Narrows is under new management, the Narrows is Samson's turf, and Samson collects protection, and people need to find out what happens when they don't pay. Now, the first moment that scene came up, and while I was watching it, I was thinking, this scene is probably very useless, unless it was kind of foreshadowing that Lee is going to try to get back the Narrows, that Lee is going to try to come back at both Samson and Sofia and take back the Narrows. And that is exactly what happened throughout the majority of the episode, because Lee was hell-bent on revenge, Lee was hell-bent on taking back the Narrows, and Lee was hell-bent on taking down Sofia. Number 2. Now, I'm not really sure if Jim had the right explanation for that warning that Falcone gave him before he died. So, we all do know that Falcone did warn Jim before he died that he had no idea what he brought to Gotham. And I think it is kind of stupid to think that warning was about the pig. I think the warning was pretty much about Sofia. Sofia is kind of psychotic, she's kind of crazy, she is kind of insane, and that was kind of proven on this episode. That girl just had a lot of psychological issues going on, and a lot of them unresolved, and they were all brewing up inside, and she just brought them all out by the end of this episode. But moving on to number 3, the theme that was going on over the course of 2 episodes so far, asking for help. That kind of continued with Bruce and Selina. Now, when it comes to Bruce and Selina, we've just got our first Easter egg on this episode. Now, first off, I did love all those Bruce and Selina moments. However though, since they're not doing the full-on Catwoman and Batman as of yet, they're kind of trying to do the push-pull, love-hate sort of relationship that they have in the comics, as Bruce and Selina on one hand, and as Batman and Catwoman on the other hand. I did love as well the entire action sequence with Bruce and Selina, because there were a lot of times in the comics that you could point out where Catwoman and Batman ended up fighting together on one side or on the same side in order to fight a common enemy, or because one of them came to the rescue of the other. Number 4. So is it really just me, or did we all think the Headhunter was dead during the first half of the season? You know, during that attack on the Narrows episode. I think it was all of us, actually. But nonetheless, that doesn't really matter. There was a major Easter egg on this episode for the Headhunter in the comics, and funny enough, it was pretty indirect. Now, by the end of the episode, Lee puts 2 bullets in Sofia, and she doesn't miss, and one of these 2 bullets is right in Sofia's head. This is exactly the MO of the Headhunter in the comics, where he puts 2 bullets in each of his victims. He never misses, and the first one usually goes in the victim's head, while the second one is just a trademark of his. Like, I killed this guy, so I just put a second bullet in him as some sort of signature. It was interesting though that the Headhunter was not the one to do it on this episode. It was interesting that it was Lee that had to do it, and she did it in reverse. She had to get Sofia's attention, she had to make her turn around, look at her, and then she managed to shoot her in her head. Number 5, Sofia Falcone is in a coma by the end of the episode, which is kind of representative of what happened to Butch at the end of last season. This is basically the show's way of leaving room for her to make a comeback at some point. Now, this has been repeated so many times on the series, I would think I would be irritated by it happening one more time. But nonetheless, it is kind of exciting because I did love what Crystal Reed did with the role over there. I did love what she did with the role of Sofia Falcone. I do love the writing for Sofia Falcone, and I am definitely looking forward to the return of Sofia Falcone at some point down the road. Number 6, while we are still on the subject of both Lee and Sofia, I do think that Lee is becoming the crime doctor from the comics. Now, as a matter of fact, there are a lot of hints towards that on this episode. For starters, we've got the way she's willing to work with both Nigma and Penguin at the beginning of the episode, even after realizing that Nigma is no more Ed Nigma, but rather the Riddler. There is as well all that extreme anger that we did see on her. Now, it's not really a new color, but in a clear state of mind, not affected by something like the Tech virus. It is interesting to see her willing to go bad. We've got at least 2 other incidents as well that kind of hint towards that effect, including taking Penguin away from the cops and including her putting 2 bullets in Sofia without even blinking an eye. But moving on to number 7, well, that entire Arthur Penn sequence was kind of interesting and kind of funny because of that resort where they all act like babies. It was kind of a cliched scene as well. Now, both of Harvey and Gordon did know that Sofia was probably coming for Penn, and yet they found it kind of convenient to question him within the resort rather than taking him back to the GCPD. In full honesty, that was a really lame plot device right there. Number 8, show us the crazy. That is exactly what Sofia did on this episode. Now, there were a lot of amazing one-liners when it came to the character of Crystal Reed, Sofia Falcone, on this episode. So, even if she would have died on this episode, she would have gone out with a bang, and she would have gone out after leaving an impression on the audience of the series. Her entrance in that shootout scene in the resort, that was really good. Jim Gordon, we could have had a good thing, you and I, you just had to go and ruin it. That was kind of priceless and very Sofia Falcone in the comics. I just kept getting that Sofia Falcone vibe from the comics throughout that entire sequence. Would it have been so bad being in the palm of my hands, having me chip away at your soul little by little? Was it so important to rob me of my revenge? It all just added up in this one insanity direction throughout the entire episode. Now, I did love how she called Jim on his pride and his arrogance. Those 2 qualities of Jim kind of got irritating at times, extremely irritating at times, over the course of more than 3 seasons now. But interestingly though, and as part of that insanity thing going on, and as she drills so many holes with her bullets into Jim, she does as well indicate she still cares for him, as in that girl has got feelings for him, as in her feelings were actually partially real, as in the show was adding to that psycho situation going on with her, and in a good way. But number 9 though, if Zsasz is on an episode and I did not mention all the hilarious moments that came with him, then I've definitely done an incomplete job. So I'm just gonna pick my favorite moment when it comes to Zsasz, which is basically a statement to Harvey. Bullock, dude, I thought you stopped being a cop. Guess it didn't take. It is both the acting put in the character of Zsasz and the one-liners that are written for him that makes this character one of my favorites on Gotham. Number 10. Grundy living in the sewers, that's very comic book-ish. Very Long Halloween as well. That is pretty much where Batman ends up fighting him once in the Long Halloween arc, and then ends up visiting him in the sewers a second time around in order to have Thanksgiving dinner with him, referring to him at that point as another lost soul in Gotham. Now, I do keep mentioning the Long Halloween and the Year 1 arcs because these 2 were the inspiration for the season in general, so that is why my picks are usually out of these 2 arcs when it comes to Easter eggs and references, even the ones repeating over the course of other arcs in the Batman comics. But finally though, as evidenced by how the episode ended, that migraine and the noises in Barbara's head, all of that kind of leads into whatever it is that Al-Ghul passed on to her in her visit to him in prison. This is just going to be epic, especially with whatever ability she's got at the moment. That light coming out of the palm of her hand. That is going to be amazing to watch, and I can't wait to find out whatever it is that she's going to do with that ability. But anyway, and in all cases, this episode was quite good. It was really a solid one, even though there were a few cliches here and there, and even though there were a few setbacks when it comes to the writing of some scenes. Not too many, but some scenes. Now you can all let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments down below. You can let me know as well if I did miss any of the major Easter eggs, the operative word here being major. You could also drop this video a much appreciated like if you did like its content, and while you're at it, you can always subscribe and enable notifications for my future videos. Until I see you next time though, thank you all for tuning in and have a great day.